For 3 years, an old man swept the floors of Barrett Keane's metal shop, while Barrett's 6-year-old daughter called him Mr. Gid and saved him a seat at every meal. The shop was failing. Barrett was 3 months behind on his loan, 2 behind on the lease, and 1 bank letter away from losing everything bolted to the floor. The old man never missed a morning. He earned less than the apprentice, ate whatever Barrett split with him, and never told anyone that his name was on 47 factories and a fortune beyond counting. Barrett did not know who was sweeping his floors. He did not know the man with the broom was recording every kindness in pencil. Barrett Keane pulled into the gravel lot behind Keane Custom Metalworks at 5:22 in the morning, with his daughter asleep in the passenger seat, her chin resting on a small stuffed brass-colored owl with 1 button eye and a stitched patch cut from her mother's old work shirt. The owl's name was Copperpot. Nell had not let go of it since they left the apartment, and Barrett had learned years ago not to move the owl before Nell decided the owl was ready. He carried her inside with 1 arm, her backpack hooked over his opposite shoulder, and set her on the office cot with the wool blanket she kept folded at the foot. He tucked Copperpot under her arm. Then he turned on the shop lights 1 bay at a time, the way a man walked through a house he had built, knowing which switch stuck, which fluorescent tube flickered twice before holding, which corner of the concrete floor pooled water when it rained. Gideon was already there. The old man stood beneath the press brake with a push broom, working dust from the gap between the machine base and the floor, with the patience of someone who had nowhere else to be. He wore a gray shop apron over a flannel shirt, steel-toed boots that had been resoled at least once, and a cloth cap he never removed indoors. He had worked as Barrett's janitor for 3 years. He arrived before Barrett most mornings. He never complained about the cold, the dust, or the pay, which Barrett calculated on a Thursday night spreadsheet that made his chest tight. Barrett watched Gideon angle the broom wrong and stepped across the bay. He adjusted the old man's grip on the handle, 2 fingers lower, wrist straight, push from the shoulder, the same way he corrected a weld angle on Quincy's practice plates, without mockery, without hurry. You keep sweeping against the grain of that concrete, and you will just move the same dirt back and forth, Barrett said. Gideon looked at his hands, adjusted, swept again. The dust moved. Nell appeared in the office doorway with Copperpot hanging from 1 fist, her hair flattened on the left side. She watched the 2 men the way she watched everything, with the quiet, unsettling focus of a child who noticed what adults touched when they were scared. Is Mr. Gid still a janitor, if Dad keeps teaching him sparks? Barrett hung his jacket on the hook beside the welding hood. He is whatever he wants to learn properly. By 7, the shop was running. Quincy wrote, Barrett's part-time apprentice, 19, crawled out from under the CNC plasma table with dust on his cheek and a stripped screw stuck magnetically to his sleeve. He held it up like evidence. Barrett glanced at it, said drawer 4, bin 2, and went back to the cut list. At 8:15, Talia Bream walked through the front bay carrying a cracked elevator bracket wrapped in a towel because the edges were sharp enough to cut through a cardboard box. She set it on the counter and unwrapped it the way someone unwraps a limb they are not sure is still attached. 2 shops said no, Talia said. Replacement part is back-ordered until September. Barrett turned the bracket under the overhead light. He ran his thumb along the fracture line near the bolt holes and stopped. The stress cracks radiated outward from the mounting surface in a pattern that meant the failure was not impact. It was fatigue. Cyclic loading. The bracket had been flexing under elevator travel for years, and the original weld had no reinforcement sleeve along the load path. A pretty bead can still be a bad weld, Barrett said. He set the bracket on the welding bench. I can sleeve the load path and re-weld the fracture, but the geometry has to change, or it will crack again in 18 months. Talia looked at the bracket, then at Barrett. Can you make it safe by Friday? Thursday. Gideon leaned on the broom handle in the far corner and watched Barrett sketch the sleeve profile on a scrap of cardboard with a carpenter's pencil. The old man's eyes moved the way a reader's eyes move, left to right, tracking each line, each annotation, as if the sketch were written in a language he had not spoken in a long time, but had never forgotten. Nell sat on the office floor with Copperpot propped against the desk leg. She had arranged a row of washers and bolts by size across the tile, each grouping assigned a name written in crayon on a sticky note. The biggest washer was Mr. Big Job. The smallest bolt was Sleepy. She looked up at Talia through the open office door. "Did your elevator break something, or did something break your elevator?" Talia blinked. Barrett did not look up from the sketch. "She does that," he said. The letter arrived on a Tuesday. It came in a Northridge commercial bank envelope with a blue stripe along the left edge, certified, requiring a signature. Barrett signed for it with a marker because every pen in the office had disappeared into Nell's pencil box, which she kept inside Copperpot's house, a shoebox lined with felt scraps. He opened the envelope standing at the counter. The language was mechanical: acceleration of the outstanding balance, demand for full repayment within 30 days, notice of the bank's right to seize pledged collateral including equipment, tooling, and the contents of the premises. Barrett was 3 months behind on the shop loan, 2 on the building lease, and carrying $27,000 in supplier debt. Barrett folded the letter once, then again, the creases sharp and even. He placed it under Nell's spelling worksheet on the desk. Marnie Bell, who owned the hardware store 2 doors down, stepped through the shop's side entrance, carrying an invoice and a paper cup of coffee she had not been asked to bring. She stopped when she saw the way Barrett's thumb pressed into the burn scar at the base of his right hand, the old TIG torch mark he rubbed when numbers were bad. "What was that?" Marnie said. "Mail." Nell climbed onto the office chair with Copperpot in her lap and looked at the stack of papers. "Is that paper louder than the grinder?" Barrett's hand stilled on the scar. "Only if I let it be." 4 days later, a man in khaki pants and a company lanyard walked into Keane Custom Metalworks with a tablet and a list. He did not introduce himself to Barrett. He began photographing the CNC plasma table, the MIG welder, the TIG rig, the press brake, the inventory racks, the hand tools on the pegboard wall. He moved through the shop the way an appraiser moves through a foreclosed house, measuring, not seeing. Quincy stood near the torch leads with his hands tight at his sides. Barrett kept working, adjusting a fixture clamp as if the man with the tablet were wind that would pass on its own. Nell watched through the office window. Copperpot pressed against the glass so the owl could see too. The inspector opened the office door and raised the tablet toward Nell's cot, the blanket, the shoebox, the drawings taped to the wall above the welding cabinet. Nell's drawings, crayon on printer paper, of Barrett with a welding hood and Copperpot with a cape. Barrett stepped into the doorway. His gloves were still on. His shoulders filled the frame. "The machine is collateral. She is not." The inspector lowered the tablet. Barrett did not move from the doorway until the man had walked back through the bay and out the front entrance. Then Barrett closed the office door, sat on the edge of the cot where Nell slept every night he worked late, and pressed both palms flat against his knees until the shaking stopped. On the loading dock that afternoon, Barrett split a ham sandwich into 3 pieces and handed one to Nell and one to Gideon. He told them he had already eaten. He had not. He had skipped breakfast because the milk in the apartment had turned, and he had poured the last of it into Nell's cereal before they left. Gideon ate slowly, and then asked Barrett to look at a practice weld he had made on a scrap plate that morning. The bead was crooked, the travel speed uneven, the heat too high on the left side where the puddle had blown out. Barrett picked up the plate and turned it under the light. "You are pushing too fast at the start, and then slowing down when you see the puddle form. Keep the speed constant, let the arc do the work, and drop your torch angle about 10 degrees. You are blowing the shielding gas off the weld pool." Gideon took the plate back and studied it. Most men charge for lessons. Most lessons cost enough already. Nell had placed a washer on Copperpot's head like a helmet. She looked up at Gideon with the owl balanced on her knee. "Dad never laughs when people are learning," she said. "He only laughs when Copperpot falls off the chair. Gideon's face changed. Something behind his eyes recalculated, the way a column of numbers shifts when you discover the decimal has been in the wrong place all along. But he said nothing. He picked up the scrap plate and went back inside. Desmond Vale's office at Northridge Commercial Bank had no pictures on the walls. The conference room where he met Barrett had no receptionist, no water, no second chair on Barrett's side of the table. Desmond wore a pressed shirt with cufflinks that did not match his watch, and a smile that arrived a half-second before his sentences, as if he had been told that smiling first made difficult news easier to receive. He slid a document across the table. This is a release of personal liability on 40% of the outstanding balance. In exchange, you sign over the equipment, the tooling inventory, and the shop contents. The bank files a satisfaction, and you walk away without a judgment. Barrett read the payoff sheet. He read it slowly, the way he read material certifications. Every number, every line, every decimal. His thumb found the scar. He stopped on the third line. This fee was not on the original note. Restructuring carries administrative costs. This one was not on the restructured note either. I have the original in my files. Desmond tilted his head. The smile did not leave, but it stopped moving. Mr. Keane, I understand this is stressful, but pride is expensive when there is a child at home. Barrett set the document on the table and pushed it back across the laminate surface. The paper slid evenly, because his hand was steady. Then stop trying to sell me mine. He stood and walked out of the conference room without closing the door behind him. That night, Barrett sat at the shop desk with Nell asleep on the cot, copperpot tucked under her arm, one felt ear bent against the pillow. Quincy hunched over the old office computer, clicking through emailed bank statements with the concentration of a boy who had once debugged code at 3 a.m. during a robotics competition. 3 of these are different from the copies in the paper file, Quincy said. He pointed at the screen without touching it, the way Barrett had taught him to point at welds. That is not a typo. That is 3 different numbers. Gideon, who had stayed late to mop the welding bay, appeared in the office doorway, still holding the mop handle. He looked at the screen over Quincy's shoulder and asked a question that a janitor had no reason to ask. Who else has portal access to that account? And when was the last time the original amortization schedule was downloaded to a local drive? Barrett looked at him. I read, Gideon said. Barrett turned back to the desk and pulled open the drawer behind the welding manuals. Mara's drawer, still labeled in her handwriting with the label maker she had used on everything in the house, including the spice jars Barrett had never rearranged. Inside was the original loan folder, the ink slightly faded, the paper smelling like the lavender hand lotion Mara kept on her desk. He compared the numbers. The folder confirmed what Quincy had found. Gideon said, "Print everything before morning." Quincy printed until the toner ran thin. Nell turned on the cot and pulled Copperpot closer without waking. 2 days later, Talia called. The hospital service elevator needed the bracket faster than planned. A second unit had failed inspection, and the building engineer wanted Barrett's repaired bracket installed by the end of the week, or the hospital would face an operational shutdown on floors 6 through 9. Barrett set up the welding bench at 6 in the morning. He cut the reinforcement sleeve from 1/4-inch plate on the bandsaw, squared the edges on the belt grinder, beveled the fracture edges to a 37.5-degree prep for full penetration, and clamped the bracket into the fixture with 4 C-clamps and a pair of locking pliers to hold the geometry true against heat distortion. Then he began the weld sequence. Root pass with TIAG for controlled penetration and fusion at the base of the joint. Fill passes with short-circuit MIG to build the cross-section while managing heat input, and a cap pass dressed flat with a flap disc, so the mounting surface would sit flush against the elevator rail without shimming. Nell woke and sat behind the yellow safety line on a stool with Copperpot in her lap, counting sparks the way other children counted sheep. Each time the arc flared, she whispered a number to the owl. Quincy watched from the layout table, his hands flat on the steel surface. Gideon stopped sweeping entirely. He stood near the back wall with the broom resting against his hip, motionless, watching Barrett work the way a retired conductor watches a violinist who does not know anyone important is in the room. Barrett pulled the bracket from the fixture, checked the weld profile with a gloved thumb along every seam, the same gesture he used on Nell's backpack zipper every morning, and set it on the inspection table. The sleeve held. The geometry was true. The grain of the weld surface was even, with no undercut, no porosity visible to the eye. Talia arrived and picked it up. She turned it over twice. How did you know where it would fail? Metal usually tells the truth before people do. Gideon turned and walked out the back door into the alley. He pulled a cracked, prepaid phone from his lunch pail and flipped it open. His posture changed. The stoop left his shoulders. The shuffle left his feet. He dialed a number from memory. "Etta, it is Gideon." A pause. "I need Northridge Commercial Bank's loan file for a business called Keane Custom Metalworks. I need the internal history on a recovery officer named Desmond Vale. And I need a full board packet prepared for a succession vote." Another pause. Longer. "No, not a donation. A succession decision." He closed the phone and stood in the alley for a full minute, looking at the back wall of the shop where Barrett had mounted a security light with screws. He had countersunk himself so the heads would sit flush and not catch rain. Inside Bell Hardware, Marnie lowered a box of nails to the counter. She had been holding it in the air since Gideon stepped outside. She did not know why her arms had stopped. That evening, Barrett drove Gideon home because the old man's bus route had been canceled in the sleet, and the next one would not run until morning. But the old man had not given Barrett his address, and Barrett did not press. He brought Gideon to the apartment above the closed bakery on Vine Street instead. The stairwell smelled like old flour and damp plaster. Barrett unlocked the door with a key that stuck unless he lifted the handle while turning, a trick he had learned the first week and never fixed because the landlord charged for locksmith calls. Nell had run ahead up the stairs and was waiting at the top with Copperpot. "Mr. Gid has never been here," Nell said. "He should sit in the good chair." The apartment had 2 rooms, a kitchen with a stove that clicked 3 times before lighting, and a window Barrett had sealed with duct tape in November because the frame had warped, and the draft made Nell's corner of the bedroom cold enough to see her breath. The furniture was clean but sparse, a table with 2 chairs and a folding stool Barrett brought out for guests, though guests were rare enough that the stool had a layer of dust along its crossbar. Nell made toast and set 3 plates on the table. She placed Copperpot on the folding stool between Barrett and Gideon because, she explained, Copperpot liked to be included in dinner, even though owls did not eat toast. She poured water into 3 mugs because there were no clean glasses, and because, she added, mugs were better for holding with cold hands. Gideon saw the unpaid utility notice held to the refrigerator with a magnet shaped like a wrench. He saw the tiny welded shelf Barrett had built beside Nell's bed to hold her library books, each weld ground smooth, so no edge could catch her sleeve in the dark. He saw the single-framed photograph on the kitchen wall, Barrett and Mara at a county fair, Nell in a carrier on Barrett's chest, small enough that her face was mostly hat. Beside the photograph, a label made with Mara's label maker read, "Keane Family, Best Day." The adhesive had yellowed, but it held. "I'm sorry the meal is small," Barrett said. Nell leaned against her father's side, her eyes falling shut. "Dad makes broken things stay useful." Gideon set down his toast. "Yes, I have noticed that." He stayed until Nell was asleep. Barrett walked him down the stairwell and offered to drive him wherever he needed to go, but Gideon said the sleet had stopped, and he preferred the walk. Barrett watched the old man step onto the sidewalk and turn left, toward the bus depot with his hands in his pockets, moving at the pace of someone who was not going home, but deciding something. The supplier call came Monday morning. Barrett had the phone wedged between his shoulder and his ear while he marked a cut list on the layout table when the account manager told him the hold had come from a bank inquiry, not an internal credit decision. Barrett set the marker down. He asked when the hold had been placed. The answer was the previous Thursday, the same day Desmond had offered the release. No new orders until the hold was resolved. The steel Barrett needed for 2 pending jobs was sitting in a warehouse 12 miles away, with his name on the purchase order and a flag on the account that meant it would not leave the loading dock. Quincy, who was already tying on his shop apron when Barrett hung up the phone, offered to work the rest of the month without pay. He said it quietly, the way he said most things, and he did not look at Barrett when he said it, because he already knew the answer. Marnie arrived at 8 with a box of breakfast rolls and 2 coffees, claiming she had over-ordered, though the box had not been opened and the receipt was still taped to the lid. Nell stood on the office chair and taped a drawing of Copperpot, wearing a welding hood directly over the foreclosure notice on the wall. The owl in the drawing had both eyes. Beneath it she had written, in purple crayon, "Copperpot says stay." Barrett took the coffee. He did not take the offer. "Nobody works for free because I am scared." Quincy looked at the floor. Marnie looked at the coffee in Barrett's hand, which he held the way a man holds a glass of water someone brings to a hospital bed, with gratitude and shame in equal measure. Neither of them left. Quincy picked up the cut list Barrett had been marking and started calculating material lengths on the back of an envelope. Marnie put the rolls on the office desk beside Nell's pencil box and closed the door behind her without saying goodbye, which was the kindest thing she had done all week. Desmond Vale arrived at 11:15 on a Thursday, with a woman in a gray suit who carried a briefcase and did not make eye contact with anyone in the shop, a man with a locksmith's kit on his belt who stood just inside the bay door, as if measuring whether the frame could take a padlock, and Ronan Pike, an auction representative who stood beside a tablet and a roll of numbered stickers, measuring the shop with his eyes before speaking to anyone. Desmond stepped through the bay door without knocking. "Mr. Keane, this is a formal notice of premises abandonment under Section 12 of your loan agreement. The bank is exercising its right to secure and liquidate pledged collateral." Barrett was standing at the welding bench, gloves still on, hood pushed back on his forehead. Talia's completed bracket sat on the inspection table waiting for pickup. Nell stood behind the office glass with Copperpot pressed to her chest, both the girl and the owl watching with the same unblinking focus. "I am inside my shop," Barrett said, "working. Our records indicate the premises have been non-operational for—" "Your records are wrong. I completed a job yesterday. The invoice is on the counter." Ronan began placing numbered stickers on equipment. He put one on the CNC plasma table, one on the MIG welder, one on the press brake. When he reached the TIG rig, the machine Barrett had used to lay the root pass on Talia's bracket, the machine Mara had helped him bolt to the floor the year Nell was born, Barrett peeled the sticker off the housing without tearing it and set it on the table. Marnie appeared in the side entrance. Quincy came in from the back lot. Desmond smoothed the front of his coat. "This is not personal, Mr. Keane." "Then you should have had no trouble doing it honestly." Desmond's mouth thinned. He turned to the locksmith. Gideon stepped between Desmond and the machines. The old man untied his gray apron. He folded it with the same deliberate care Barrett used when folding steel layout templates. Corners matched, creases deliberate. He placed the apron on Barrett's workbench. The shop door opened. A woman in a dark wool coat stepped from a black town car parked at the curb. She carried a leather folio held flat against her chest and waited on the threshold until Gideon looked at her and nodded. Then she entered and stood beside him. "My name is Etta Solberg," she said. "I am general counsel for Rusk Dominion Works. This is Mr. Gideon Rusk." Desmond's face went the color of unprimed steel. Etta opened the folio on Barrett's workbench. "We have purchased the outstanding note on this property and its associated business obligations from Northridge Commercial Bank as of 9 o'clock this morning. We have also prepared an injunction-ready filing regarding undisclosed fees totaling $14,000, altered amortization documents submitted under Mr. Vale's authorization, and misrepresentation of premises status in your abandonment claim." Desmond turned to Gideon. His mouth opened and closed without producing a word that held. Gideon's voice had changed. The softness was gone. What remained was plain and hard and unhurried. The voice of a man who had built factories in 4 countries and closed them in 2, who had held a broom for 3 years because he trusted patience more than interviews. "You came to strip a shop. You found the owner of your paper," Nell whispered to Copperpot behind the office glass. "Mr. Gid has a different voice." Desmond reached for his briefcase. Etta placed a second document on the workbench. Desmond looked at the page, then at Gideon, and then he picked up his briefcase and walked out of the shop without signing anything. The locksmith followed. The woman in the gray suit followed. Ronan Pike collected his numbered stickers in silence, nodded once to Barrett, and left. The shop was quiet. Gideon stood in the center of the welding bay without his apron, and for the first time in 3 years, the people around him saw him the way Etta had always seen him, upright, still, carrying a weight he had chosen. He spoke to Barrett without ceremony. Marnie stood in the side doorway. Quincy stood by the layout table. Talia, who had come to pick up the finished bracket, stood near the front bay with her car keys still in her hand. "I spent 3 years looking for someone who would run a floor the way it deserves to be run. I visited 11 shops in 6 states. I swept floors, emptied trash, cleaned bathrooms, mopped bays. I watched how men treated the person with no title and no leverage." He paused. "You taught me after I ruined a weld coupon. You paid me before yourself when payroll was short. You split your lunch with me on a day you had not eaten breakfast. Your daughter asked whether old men could learn new things, and you told her a man is whatever he wants to learn properly." He reached into his shirt pocket and removed a small folded piece of paper. Dates, each one written in pencil. He unfolded it and held it flat against the workbench, and everyone in the room could see that the list was long. 3 years of entries, each one a date when Barrett Keane had done something decent without knowing anyone was recording it. "I did not come here to see how you treated a billionaire. I came to see how you treated a man with a broom." The shop was silent. Marnie put her hand over her mouth. Quincy blinked and did not wipe his eyes. Gideon paid the bank debt in full. He cleared every supplier balance Barrett owed. He offered Barrett controlling stewardship of Rusk Dominion's fabrication division, 47 facilities, 6,000 workers, and a name that had meant precision manufacturing for 4 decades, beginning with full ownership of the shop building and every machine Desmond Vale had tried to sticker and sell. Nell opened the office door and stepped onto the shop floor with Copperpot dangling from one hand. She looked at her father. Barrett looked at the floor, then at the press brake, then at the folded apron on his workbench. He did not smile. He pressed his thumb into the burn scar at the base of his right hand, the way he always did when the numbers were too large to hold. He did not celebrate. He sat in the office with the keys to the building on the desk, beside a thermos of cold coffee. Nell sat on the cot with Copperpot, watching her father the way she watched him when the phone rang after dinner, carefully, looking for the line in his jaw that meant the news was bad. Barrett asked what would happen to Quincy's apprenticeship if he took on a factory. He asked whether Gideon's existing crews had union contracts and whether the transition would cost anyone a shift. He asked who would handle the elevator bracket customers and the small batch industrial work that the big facilities would not want. Gideon answered each question the way Barrett answered Nell's questions, plainly, with specific detail, without decoration or pressure. Nell placed Copperpot beside the keys on the desk. "He can guard them until you stop looking scared." Barrett touched the burn scar on his thumb one more time. Then he picked up the keys. "I know how to run work. I do not know how to inherit an empire." "Then learn it the way you taught me to weld," Gideon said. "One honest pass at a time." 3 weeks later, Barrett walked the main floor of Rusk Dominion's central factory outside Scranton, with Nell beside him, Copperpot tucked into the top of her backpack so the owl could see. The building was 200,000 square feet of organized steel, light and motion, presses stamping, laser tables cutting, robotic welding cells cycling behind safety curtains, overhead cranes gliding on rails that hummed when loaded. Barrett stopped at a welding station where a young operator was fighting a fixture alignment. He asked the man's name. It was Dennis. Then Barrett asked whether Dennis wanted help or just a second pair of eyes. Dennis said, "Help." Barrett showed him how to shim the base plate with a folded piece of steel shim stock to correct the angle, and he did not touch Dennis's machine until Dennis nodded. Nell watched her father move through the factory floor the same way he moved through his small shop, checking, asking, adjusting without raising his voice or pulling rank that was 3 weeks old and still fit like someone else's coat. Later, back at Keane Custom Metalworks, Barrett, Nell, Gideon, and Quincy sat at the same scarred table where Barrett had eaten every working lunch for 6 years. The table had a burn ring from a coffee pot and a scratch from the time Nell had tried to write her name on it with a welding soapstone. Gideon's gray apron hung on a hook beside Barrett's welding jacket. Nell gave Copperpot a washer to hold. "Does this mean Mr. Gid owns the broom again?" Nell said. Barrett looked at the apron, then at his daughter, then at the old man who had swept his floors for 3 years to find out what kind of person he was when no one powerful was watching. "No, it means we know where to hang it. If this story stayed with you, subscribe so you will not miss what comes next.